Welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be talking about the CSS Box Model. So, what is the box model? So, the box model essentially is essentially a box that wraps around every HTML element, right? So, all HTML elements can be considered as boxes, or you can envision it as a box around every element. So we talk about the box model when we are talking about design and layout of our HTML elements, right? So the, this box model that we are going to be looking at in a few seconds is going to consist of, in the previous lesson we talked about these four items, which is the margins of the element, the borders, the padding, and the actual contents. So this is how the box model looks like, right? So we have the padding, the border, the margin, and we have the actual contents, right? So even before we explain these things, I want us to first look at what the content is. So the content is the main HTML element that we are considering, right? So anytime we talk about the the height and width of an element, we are only talking about the height and width of the actual content. We don't consider the padding, the border, the margin, right? So uh, the actual height and width of the actual elements of the box model does not take into consideration the values that you set. So you have to do the calculation yourself, right? So what are these margin, border, padding for those of you who skipped the previous lesson? Right. So we have the content itself, and the content of the box is where the text and the images appear. So wherever you have your text and your images, that is actual content, right? And then the next thing above that is your padding, right? And the padding is the area around the content. Okay, and most of the time the padding is transparent. It's actually transparent. So is that area round your content to the border. So that is your padding. And then you have the border itself, and the border is what goes around the padding and the content. So you can see here, this is the border of the element, right? It goes around your content and the pattern, right? And the final one is your margin, and the margin is the area outside the border, and it's also transparent, right? So this is the box model, and we will take a quick example after we go through all the explanations here. So anytime that you want to design, you need to consider these other uh, items: your margin, your border, and your padding, right? So if you intended to calculate the total width of your element, you need to consider the actual width that you have specified plus the width of your padding plus the width of your margin, right? So you have to consider all of that to get the total width of your element. So let's take a quick example. So this is a simple HTML here, and you can see that we have our H2, which says box model, and our P here, which just says box model is a box that wraps around every HTML element, and it consists of padding, margins, and actual content. And then we have this div right here, that has some text in there telling us this text is a content of a box, and we're going to add a 50 pixel padding, 20 pixel margin, and a 15 pixel border, green border, right? So this is what we are gonna take a look at in terms of the box model. So I haven't styled it yet. I'm not. We are gonna do that now. So the actual width of this is gonna be the actual width of the content, right? So let's set the width first, right? And just to make us see what we're talking about, let's set a background color for our div. So everything that we're gonna be working on is on this div right here. So in the style, I'm gonna say div, and then I'm gonna style it. So I'm gonna set the background color, and I'm gonna set it to gray, light gray, right? So just so you know, so this is the light gray, right? So you can see already that it's it's just where the content is, and you can see it in a box, right? That's good. So the next thing that we're gonna look at is the width of this. So I'm going to set a 30 pixel width. And again, like I said, this width is going to be the, sorry, did I say 30 pixel? Sorry, 300 pixel, right? It's going to be the width of the content, right? It does not consider the padding, the margins, none of that, right? So this is just the content of your element. So you can see this is the width, right? And then we would want a border, right? So we want to see a 15 pixel border, which should be solid, and then it should have the color green, right? So then now you have your 15 pixels of border width. It's a solid and it's green, right? So you can see, right? So that's how your border looks like. As you can see, there is no gap between your border and your content yet, right? So we haven't set a, a padding on there. So let's add a padding. So I'm gonna do that now, and I'm gonna pad this 50 pixels. Okay, so you can see that as I added the padding, the size of the entire box became bigger, right? Because now we are adding the width 300 pixels to the 50 pixels, right? So it becomes bigger, right? So that the size of your entire element becomes bigger, right? So it's not just the width that you set here. It's gonna consider the width of your padding, the width of your margins. Everything is part, right? So now we have this 50 pixels, sorry, 50 pixel space between the content and your margin and your border, right? So now the last thing we're gonna do is to add your margin. All right, good. And before we set it, you can see that the space between this and this is virtually non-existent. So the margin is what's gonna give you that space between your border and then outside content, or the content that it's surrounds, right? The content is around it. So I'm gonna set 20 pixels here, 20 pixel, and I'm gonna refresh it, right? So you can see 20 pixels here. Just so we can see it a little bit clearer, I'm gonna make it 60, and I'm gonna refresh it. So you can see that it moved because it had to give a 60 pixel space between the border and the other content. So that is the box model. You always have to take into consideration the entire box so you know how to design your page effectively. So thank you guys for sticking with me throughout this lesson and see you in the next lesson. Bye.